So at secondstreet.org, we've been doing lots of analysis into the whole notion of keeping oil in the ground. And the reason why we've looked into this is because you'll often see different protesters urging governments to just keep oil in the ground. So we've been looking into that issue, and we decided to put together a little lesson plan for students who want to, one, understand what the implications are, how their lives would be affected, but also two, what they can actually do to help the environment. And so today we're going to chat about just that. I've got Kris with us. She works full-time for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and she's a contributor to secondstreet.org. So Kris, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
So why don't we start off at the top? How are students' lives affected if we simply kept oil in the ground? What would that mean to a student?
It would have a profound impact, as it would on all of our lives. So if you can just imagine our student sleeping in bed, the bed itself is almost completely made of polyester and plastic products. They wake up, they roll over, and they stop their alarm. That alarm nowadays is usually contained within a mobile phone, which is again full of plastic products. Or if they're really old school, they might actually have a clock radio, as I do, again, that is full of plastic products, all the way from the very components itself, the casing, to the cording and the insulation in the electrical cord. That's all plastic products. So they're awake. They've hit their alarm. They're already surrounded by plastic. They get up and they put their feet down. Again, that flooring, it could be laminate, it could be carpet, it could be vinyl. Again, all of those are oil and gas products. Shuffle their way into the kitchen, maybe open up their box of cereal, that plastic liner on the inside that keeps their Cheerios fresh and sanitary. Again, that's made of plastic. Hit their coffee machine to get it going. Again, almost all plastic. And then if they maybe open up their refrigerator and open up their yogurt container or have some milk, all of those are contained within plastic products. So our student in mind has just woken up and started their day, and they're completely surrounded by and dependent on oil and gas products and plastic just starting off.
Yeah, it truly is incredible how many different things around the home are made with oil and gas products. Now, what about even like when you go into the bathroom and you're doing your teeth? I think about a toothbrush, right? I mean, so often they're made of plastics, the bristles or material too that comes from petroleum. Even stuff in people's medicine cabinet, things like deodorant and other things.
And makeup.
Makeup too. Yeah, that's a great one too that I don't think people always intuitively think about. And then what about even like on the way to school? Like, I think too, like even one of the cleanest forms of transportation, a bicycle, those wheels are often people think they're rubber, but there's often petroleum products in the wheels too. And the plastic grips and different things on a bicycle. You're not even free of oil if you're riding a bike, are you?
No, you're not. And keep in mind also that there's also the light that you hopefully have on the front of your bike, the reflector, the basket, if you're bringing stuff to and from school on your bicycle, your brake handle grips, all those things are petroleum-based products. And, I loved riding my bike. I did it for many, many years when I lived in downtown Ottawa. I know my husband did too when he was riding his bike to university. And so again, even if you're riding your bicycle, that bicycle is made largely of plastic components, or it's been manufactured by and delivered to you using oil and gas in order to get it to you. So even if you're choosing a bicycle, you're still quite dependent on oil and gas.
Mm-hmm. And even obviously, if you're getting a ride in a car to school, certainly you're going to be dependent on oil. Even electric cars. I read that half the volume of the parts that make up an electric car are plastic. So even with electric cars, they're dependent. And we've got an entire video that discusses that. But school buses, obviously, it's the same case too. They run on diesel, which comes from oil.
And now transit buses too. Transit buses as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you're actually at school, again, we find all kinds of different things around a typical classroom that would be made with oil, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Everything from if you've got something high tech and cool, like your smartphones or your laptops, all the way to the front of the class. Back when I was a kid, those actually used to be chalkboards, but nowadays they're whiteboards. And from the boards themselves all the way down to the markers, those are all plastic and petroleum products.
Yeah, I think too, and we've got a video on this, but the seats, the plastic students use, the laminate coating on their desks, even textbooks and that have that protective material on them, and that would be coming from oil products. Why don't we shift gears a little bit and talk about COVID-19? I mean, that's the big news story right now. There are lots of different ways that I've seen that oil products have been used in that fight, and I'll get your take in a sec. But I thought what I would start with is the healthcare system. You know, the big talk right now is all about ventilators. Do we have enough? Where do we get more? Are people making them? And when you see these things on TV, they often have like a plastic casing, and then there's all these plastic tubes coming out of them. So ventilators obviously are a big important tool in the fight against COVID-19, but we've certainly seen other examples in the healthcare system beyond just plastics. You know, obviously syringes, those are often made with plastics, but IV bags, MRI scanners, X-ray machines, ultrasounds, all the casings for that. But if you think too about like the jelly that you use when you go for an ultrasound that gets put on you, that's petroleum too in many cases, isn't it?
It really is. An enormous amount of our healthcare system uses oil and gas and petroleum products for good reason, because they can be quickly produced and they're usually the most sanitary and most affordable option. And you keep in mind also, even the personal protective gear, which we're so hopeful enough of our first frontline responders will have. If you look at those goggles and the visors and the hair nets and the masks and all those things, the gloves, again, those are all heavily dependent on petroleum products. So it's quite lucky that we have them right now.
Well, again, too, speaking of emergency service workers and that, the vehicles that they use,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, very true.
Ambulances, fire trucks. I mean, they're running on diesel, but so many of the parts and equipment that they rely on too are coming from petroleum. And you know, there may be some days some electric ambulances, electric running ambulances.
Yes.
But certainly we're not there yet as a society. Why don't we shift gears a little bit here? And I just want to talk for a second about global demand, because the reality is that even if Canada kept our oil in the ground, demand just keeps going up and up and up. And so the world is using more and more oil. If Canada doesn't produce it, then countries are just going to go to other places to buy that oil, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And I think this really gets down to the crux of the issue. I find there's a big difference between people who are hopeful for the future and they say, yes, we're working on it. Someday we will get there. We will have different forms of fuel, different alternatives. But right now, as of this date, if one were to literally keep it in the ground, as some of these folks are saying to do, it just wouldn't be possible. And I think your point about global demand is a very good one, because we have developing countries all around the world that are surging forth in productivity and lifting their people out of poverty, in food production and agricultural advancement, in bringing energy and electricity and fuel to people who haven't had it before. And their quality of life is dramatically improving. And that's in large part coinciding with this big demand we have globally for things like oil and gas. And you're right. If Canada, for some reason, decided today to keep it in the ground, that's it, no more, they would just buy it from somewhere else. They would buy it from another country, because we couldn't stop it on a dime right now.
That's a very good point about food supply. To go back to our point about COVID-19, I mean, the big story obviously is the healthcare system and the effect of COVID-19 that we're seeing in different parts of the world, Canada included, but also grocery stores. People are going to grocery store in droves, they're stocking up. All that food and all those products are getting to the store by diesel powered vehicles. And you know, if you think about, especially with fruits and vegetables and products that are coming from overseas, someone's not putting those in a rowboat and you know, bringing them over to Canada. They're coming from those big tanker ships, which are still running on diesel too. So grocery stores would be hugely affected if we weren't using oil. Now to go to the other side of the equation, you know, we said at the beginning we were going to talk about things that can help, that are environmentally friendly, and that before we talk about things that students can do, I think it's really interesting to talk about some of the technological changes that we're seeing. And so a couple examples that I've seen that are really fascinating. One is a company called Pond Technologies, and we've got a link to their video that they've produced on our website. But what they've done, which I find fascinating, is they will take some of the carbon dioxide that's coming out of smokestacks from all kinds of different industrial centers and that, including the oil and gas sector, and they'll take that carbon dioxide and they'll pump it into a tank that has algae in it. And then the algae eats the carbon dioxide, and then people are able to process that algae into things that are actually useful, like fertilizers, and I think even some medicines and that, if I'm not mistaken. Now, on their website, they have all kinds of information. It was very fascinating to see how
That sounds really neat.
Yeah. So that was a cool. Another one that I saw that was really interesting was some truck drivers can use an app that helps them communicate with way stations that they're approaching. And if a truck driver has a very good track record, then they don't have to stop at that way station and wait for someone to come and review their load and do all that kind of stuff. Because when that happens, they end up sitting there and idling, and they burn fuel and they increase their emissions. So with this technology, they're able to get from A to B faster. They burn less fuel. It's better for the environment. The company saves money and so forth. So I find those to be really fascinating. What have you seen that you've thought have been pretty cool examples?
On the issue of trucking, you're right. There is really fascinating technology connected to it, and every little bit helps because while it may sound small for that one truck, keep in mind there are millions of trucks on the road. So if you start extrapolating and you have everybody using these sorts of apps instead of sitting there idling, you will get quite a reduction in emissions. It's lower tech, but sticking with trucks, there's even some of the things that you see now, the requirements for trucks or some of the trucking companies that they do on their own. It's really aerodynamic. So next time you're passing one safely on the highway, take a look underneath. It's what they call the skirt, or the big on the back of it, the box. And along the undercarriage of it is basically a thin but sturdy sheet of plastic, which then narrows near the tractor, near the front of the truck, and then fans out. And that just makes it much more aerodynamic. So instead of just a square box rolling down the road and hitting all of that wind, it actually is making it much more aerodynamic and thus saving fuel. They're also much better at keeping track, I know for a fact, of their tire pressure. Things like that. It really makes them use a lot less fuel. So that's really cool to see. I was also seeing, I can find the link for you. It's out of the United States. They were basically taking emissions, especially things like CO2, and then reforming it into a solid. So it looks basically like a hockey puck, and it's basically coal. And then they can just keep reusing it and recapturing it and reusing it and recapturing it. And so really that technology looks very promising because not only are they reducing the emissions so it isn't going out into the atmosphere, they're reusing fuel that they won't need again to take from the ground.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's very cool to see all the different changes that companies are making. And it's I always find it interesting when you talk to a company in any sector, and inevitably you'll hear that they are working on ways to reduce emissions. No one's putting a gun to their head. They're just often doing it because in many cases they're driven by trying to help the environment, but sometimes in other cases it's just money. They can save money by reducing their fuel usage in that. So very cool, and I would encourage any student to talk to some businesses that they come into contact with, and I'm sure they'll hear some interesting stories. Now, the other part that I said we were going to get to are interesting things that students can do to help the environment. And I think that's important. Is, we've talked about the reality that our lives are just so intertwined with oil. It's very difficult to just imagine keeping it in the ground and, converting overnight into some world without it. It's just, it's not realistic. A lot of the technology and alternatives, they're not there, and who knows if we'll ever get there. But there are things students can do. If you think about the very radical end of this discussion, it's to just stop using all these products. I mean, no one is forcing a student to buy a cell phone, or anyone else in society for that matter. No one's forcing anyone to get on an airplane and fly and go and see relatives or for sightseeing or whatever. People don't have to buy fruits and vegetables from abroad. They can stop. They can do all those sort of what I would refer to as extreme measures. But there's certainly a lot of things that are a lot more practical and realistic, aren't they? Do you have any that you could share with us?
Yes, there are. And again, there are some folks who do go to that extreme, but they're few and far between because it requires a radical change of lifestyle. And so while I don't think many of us would be able to do that right now, there are many more practical things that you can do. And I'd like to start, as a child of the 80s, the 3 Rs: reduce, reuse, recycle. If you take a look at something like reducing, you can, for example, even as simple as packing your lunch. It's amazing how few people still do this. You can use reusable containers for your food. You can take that metal spoon from your home, reuse it over and over, keep it all clean, do your own washing. And then when you add all that up at the end of the year, those are all items that you haven't done single use with all the time. And then you haven't had to hopefully then recycle. We hope you're not throwing it in the garbage. If you make those decisions, all of that really, really helps. And they're very practical solutions. So even as simple as what you're bringing or what you're packing for lunch or how you're consuming it can make a big impact.
Yeah, no, that's a very good example. It's a pretty simple thing, but it would add up, wouldn't it, if you're taking
It really does.
plastic
You eat
spoon
365 days a year. It does add up.
Yeah, no kidding, especially over the course of 12 years in school or whatever the case is for different students. One that I always find interesting is you talk about reducing. It's this notion of giveaway weekends, and several cities do it now. It started in Ottawa, and I was involved to help bring it to Winnipeg. I think Halifax does it now, a bunch of others. And if anyone's not familiar with it, it's a very simple concept. Basically, a city will designate 1 or 2 weekends a year as giveaway weekends. And then what happens is people will take something, a product that still has some value to it, but for whatever reason, someone doesn't want it or need it anymore. So maybe you've got like an old lamp or chair that you don't want, or a mug, or a pennant for sports team that you no longer cheer for, whatever the case is. You take these things, and maybe you're not going to hold a garage sale because you've only got a few of them or whatever. But what you can do is you just take them, you put them in a box, you put free on it, stick it at the front of your curb. And because everyone knows it's giveaway weekend, people will often walk around or get on their bikes or drive or whatever, and they try and find things that they can use, pick it up for free, and then use it without having to buy something. So it's a great way of recycling and keeping things out of landfills. I just love it because it doesn't cost the government anything. They just have to proclaim the weekend as a giveaway weekend. It's completely voluntary. No one has to participate. And it's great for the environment too. So.
And it's free. I could talk about that one aspect for an hour. I won't. I absolutely love giveaway weekend. I constantly go to thrift shops. In fact, I call giveaway weekend, or any other weekends in between when I find stuff, curb shopping. And I know lots of folks do that as well. Tons of things in our home are either secondhand or were actually found during giveaway weekends. We've either gotten them from antique or thrift shops, or from giveaway weekends, or from the online sellers. So the amount of diversion that does not happen now, for example, that isn't going into a landfill, and I'm not buying it brand new, that's a huge impact. And if more and more people do that, that's really just great all around.
I think too, with technology, I mean, you and I were talking earlier about free cycle. I know you're going to talk about that in a sec, but even with using things like Facebook and Instagram, because a lot of people have a lot of friends that they're connected to, and then within seconds, you could post something and say, "Hey, I got this old mug that I don't need anymore. Does anyone want it?" And then someone could say, "Sure, I'll take it." And the next time you see me, just give them the mug. And
Exactly.
You can facilitate things that way, can't you?
You can either do it directly with your friends, or there's right at the bottom of your phone, if you're on Facebook, just click the little group there with the shopping bag. That's the marketplace. Boom. Yeah. You can take a picture of whatever item you've got in front of you, and it can be gone like within an hour. It's absolutely amazing. And it really, again, reduces the amount of waste and the amount of energy going into creating the new stuff. And it saves, what I love about it, of course, is that it saves people a ton of money. And what I find fascinating often is that conserving the environment can often go hand in hand with conserving your own money. I love that those two can be wedded together.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, so next up, and actually, just to finish that point, freecycle.org is a site that people can go to where everyone is going to it with the idea that they're going to get something for free, isn't it?
It is. And then if you want to get rid of something, it could be anything, like you said, it could be anything from a cord of wood to a painting, a couch, all sorts of things like that. And you can just post it right there on FreeCycle. You connect with the person, and then they come and pick it up. It is free, and it's practically instantaneous.
Perfect. I love that one. I think that's a cool idea.
Me too.
The next is just straight up recycling. I mean, a lot of people and homes and that can still improve in that regard with recycling different products, whether it's pop bottles and containers and that kind of stuff. But also with electronics, you can recycle a lot of electronics nowadays, can't you?
Yes, you can. And I really want to stress, these systems are here. So we might as well use them. Almost all of our local municipalities or provincial authorities have ways of diverting your waste or recycling what you're no longer using. And so it's important for us to use them if you can. On your issue of electronics, almost every single municipality, if you look it up, back when we were kids, it would have been the blue pages, but nowadays you just need to Google it. You'll have a way of getting rid of your electronics. And what they often do is they'll break it down to its components again. There's different recycling facilities that just focus on electronics. They'll break down its components and they'll even reuse the stuff inside of it. So copper, platinum, all that stuff actually quite often gets reused. And if they can't reuse it, they dispose of it safely so that it's not a threat to the environment. Also on the issue of electronics, what often goes inside of our electronics can be batteries. And a lot of places now have a way of do not throw them in the garbage. There's a way of very safely getting rid of them and disposing of them. You can find that in practically every city and town across Canada. So we've really made dramatic strides in improving that.
Those are very good points. It's amazing how much they can recycle now. And I think if anyone needs an incentive to recycle and think about, just being better stewards of the environment, go to a dump. It's disgusting, isn't it? When we moved, I had to go there and unfortunately get rid of some things that you couldn't provide to others. And it was pretty disgusting to see how much we put there. So I think it's a good incentive to get people to recycle. Now, the next thing I want to come to is one that you had mentioned when we were coming up with this list, and that is just, more environmentally friendly ways of getting from A to B, walking, riding your bike, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's all sorts of alternatives that you can do, obviously, from taking your car. So you can be very careful and walk there. It's good for you. So if you're thinking of it as a student, if it's close enough to where you live and it's safe, depending on your own age and your permission to walk there by yourself, you can walk, you can take your bicycle, or if it's all the way across the city or it's way too far away, especially if it's in winter, then there's other alternatives that you can use. You can maybe get a ride with a friend, you can carpool. Quite often parents will carpool their students around, or you can get there in some other fashion. But there's quite often an alternative from just getting in your car and driving from point A to point B every single time. Now, sometimes that car will be needed, but you don't need to use it all the time. And so I think the point here is that there's often ways to reduce. And if we can think of that first, we'll go a long way.
I think that's so true. I think there's a lot of ways we can make improvements there. And I like your point about carpooling too. And that's, students aren't going to do this, I don't think, when you're still young, but as you get older and you can take a little bit more in terms of safety precautions, is people can even carpool between cities. I've seen this happening now where people, especially if you're in a smaller community, you can post, hey, I'm going to, such and such a large urban center next week. I'm leaving on Tuesday. If anyone needs a ride, you can help come with me and split the gas costs or whatever, right? And
yes,
and people are finding ways to reduce their emissions, but also save a few bucks too.
And on the point of technology, back when I was a kid, I remember seeing at the grocery store bulletin boards or at the post office, need carpool partner, will use gas money. But this was back before we had smartphones and often the internet. Now, goodness, you can quickly get a ride just by going on some of your social media sites and asking for a ride. And then, of course, there's obviously companies that specialize in ride sharing. So there's so many different alternatives that you can use now. And again, technology has really been a boon this way.
Yeah, it's really incredible and interesting to watch, to see all these different ways that technology is playing a huge part in helping people reduce their emissions, be better, more environmentally friendly, I should say. So on that note, Kris, I think we're going to wrap it up. But thank you very much for your time today. And
thank you.
If anyone wants to learn more about this, they can go to our website, which is secondstreet.org.